This year, the Friends are celebrating our 35th anniversary as a nonprofit in the community, 35 years. And for over 30 years, the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory and the Park District have teamed up for our annual plant sale. And many of you are familiar with this. You've probably been shopping it. The plants for the sale are actually grown right in our own conservatory. In fact, our speaker tonight is one of our plant caregivers, so she knows exactly what is going on back in those greenhouses. The sale is open until May 2nd, and many herbs and edibles are available for purchase. Gorgeous basils, gorgeous basils. We've got rosemary, pepper, herbs, tomatoes still available. So please shop the sale this week before the sale closes. Also, I want to mention, in a recognition of Earth Day, we have compostable pots that we are using for some of our crops this year as we test out some new sustainable options. So that is very exciting. It's the first time we're doing something like this. In addition, we are also recycling gardening pots this year for the first time. So we'll be collecting the pots that you get from the plant sale back on May 22nd. You can bring them back to the conservatory. So those are some exciting things happening in honor of Earth Day. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening, Master Gardener Suzette Gacek. Suzette's interest in gardening began in Michigan during her childhood. Her relatives had orchards, farms, and gardens for her to explore. As a teacher and librarian, she always did some form of gardening. Suzette has a special interest in native plants, composting, and attracting pollinators to her garden. The conservatory was always a destination for her family. She remembers the early days when the plant sale was known as the herb sale, and many of you probably remember that too. She's delighted to have been able to volunteer at the conservatory over the years. So I'm very excited to have you joining us tonight, Suzette. I also want to introduce Kayla Chase. Kayla Chase is our membership chair, and she is also a master gardener. And Kayla will be managing the chat and our Q&A session at the end of the program. So please use the chat box and add your questions as we go, and we'll gather them and we'll go from there. So with that, I would like to invite Suzette to share her screen and share her presentation with us.
All right. Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Nod. Yes, that's good. Okay, so thank you for the warm welcome, Judy. Happy Earth Day, everyone. A little bit of trivia in case you didn't know. A gentleman named Mr. Koenig came up with the term Earth Day. And why did he choose it? Because it rhymes with birthday. And today happens to be his birthday.
Oh.
So Earth Day, birthday. Okay, how cool is that? So I want you to contain yourself. We're going to be talking about raised beds and containers for edibles and herbs. I have a lot of information to go through, so forgive me sometimes if I'm a little speedy. All right. And it would be nice if my slide would change. Okay. There we go. We'll go back now. I apologize. Here. All right. So the topics we're going to cover are raised beds, container gardening, plants you might wish to grow. I have some bonus material. I'll mention a few resources, and then we'll get to the infamous Q&A. All right. So let's start with raised beds. Okay. We're going to be looking at the benefits, the types, the size, location, soil, and the care of raised beds. So what are some of the benefits of raised beds? Well, it simply makes gardening, vegetables, and herbs so much easier. Why? The soil stays looser. The soil warms up faster. It provides better air movement, which cuts down on disease and pest issues that you might have. And it's far easier to weed and harvest. Here's a couple of different types of raised beds. You can see on the left, the in-ground one that you might want to have in your yard. A lot of you mentioned that you are doing backyard gardening and things. You might want to put a barrier on the bottom before you put in your soil. You're going to be kinder to yourself. You'd select one like in the middle so you don't have to get down on your knees and do a lot of bending. And then I think this is a pretty cool one, the tiered one, okay, so that they have different crops on each level. So size does matter, okay? So for ease in planting and weeding, go for 4 feet width maximum. And the reason behind this is it's going to work for the average person to be able to stretch out, get those weeds without it being too cumbersome. Length generally depends on the site, but I would say 4 to 8 feet. Maybe some people want to set up multiple raised beds. It all depends on your situation and how much room you have. The depth ideally for your raised beds would be anywhere between 12 and 24 inches, depending on the plants that you're selecting. And don't forget, the larger the bed you have, the more soil is going to be needed. Location, location, location. You need to have 6 to 8 hours of sun for maximum growth potential. And always, always keep in mind easy access to water. You might decide that you're going to use sprinkler hoses or set up some kind of irrigation system, which is actually not that complicated nor that expensive these days, okay? It's getting better and better, but the old-fashioned garden hose works too. All right, this is probably one of the most important things that I want you to read tonight. I won't read the whole thing to you, but your soil is what feeds your vegetables and your herbs. They feed us, but they need the soil so that they can feed us. And that soil, we want it to be loose. We want it to be rich with nutrients and organic matter. You want your roots of your plants to be able to spread out and grow freely. And once more, we want them to have access to that water and the nutrients to sustain a healthy growth. So some soil considerations to take in mind, okay? If you're making up your batch of soil for your raised bed, you want to shoot for 1/3 topsoil, 1/3 organic matter, and 1/3 vermiculite and perlite. You don't want more than 35% of the soil to be topsoil because it would turn out it would hold too much water and it wouldn't provide all the benefits for excellent root growth. You want to avoid your garden soil. I know it's tempting, just to dig out what you got out there and throw it in, but it's going to be more compacted. It's not going to be loose. It's not going to allow room for the roots to grow. And when possible, go with an organic mix. Okay, now the amount, people always want to know, how much soil do I need? Well, here's a rough guide, and you have to use your math skills. Okay, so to find the volume of soil you need, multiply the length by the width by the height. Remember to use actual dimensions and consistent units of measure. Soil sold in bulk is going to be by the cubic yard. If you buy it in bags, it'll be by the cubic foot. So put that in your mathematical figuration when you're working that out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the care of raised beds. You want to mulch after planting, and that's going to help you kind of keep the weeds down, keep the moisture in, things like that. Plan your irrigation, as I mentioned before. Install a barrier to roots, to roots and weeds. And what I'm talking about are roots from other plants, from other locations and so forth. So if you're putting your raised garden bed right in your garden, okay, you have a couple choices. You can lay down a weed barrier and have your bed set on top of that. You can even just lay layers, multi-layers of newspaper. And that newspaper will break down, it's organic, all that good stuff. But in the meantime, what it's done is smothered the weeds, okay? And so by the end of the season, it'll be perfect. I want you to top dress annually with compost, okay? Fluff the soil as needed. That's the beauty of raised beds. The soil isn't compacted. You don't walk on it, you don't press it down. And so all you need to do is maybe, take your pitchfork or whatever, just fluff it and so forth. Be kind to it, okay? We want it to keep that air, okay? And the flowing for the water and things. We don't want it compacted at all. Cover up your soil even when you're not gardening. And so this is really important that I like to make sure in the winter when I put my bed to sleep for the winter and so forth, I'm going to put some compost on there. I'm going to put some shredded leaves on there. I want to protect that soil. I want to keep all those nutrients in there. Okay. And don't forget, you can create a pretty edible garden by adding some flowers. You might want to choose flowers like marigolds, for instance, that kind of keep away some of the pests and so forth. And so it doesn't have to be boring. It can be pretty too. All right, so moving on to containers. Containers, small but mighty. When space is limited, choose containers. I do both. I have my raised beds, but I love my containers that I'll have on the deck. If you're a person who lives in an apartment and maybe you only have a balcony or a small patio and so forth, not having a yard isn't a problem. And the cool thing about the pots is they're lighter, they're portable. I can move them as needed, and I can bring my herbs and vegetables closer to my kitchen. So let's talk about the fundamentals quickly for growing in containers. Once more, I'll talk about the benefits, the types, size, location, soil, and care. So the benefits of container gardening, okay? Less maintenance, don't we all like that? Okay, so it's not as much work per se, okay? It should be a joy, it should be a pleasure. It's going to take up less space. Portability, I mentioned before, it's also going to give you control over pests because you're going to notice them right away. So if you're there with your containers and so forth, so you're going to be able to pick them off as need be and so forth. Excellent for beginners, okay? So if you have children at home, start them out small, start them with a container. It's time saving, okay? You can kind of water all your plants at the same time, kind of do a check, do some deadheading all at the same time. They're close together. Safety from pets and wildlife. You don't have to worry about, I shouldn't say not at all, but generally you won't have such a problem like with raccoons or something like that, coming in, because if they're right by your house where people are more prone to come out and about, where if your garden's further away from the house, you might have your friendly critters come, and so forth. Fresh edibles are going to be nearby, as I mentioned, and it's easy to control your soil quality, especially with containers, okay? Let's talk about containers for a minute. Generally, they're categorized into two types. You have porous containers and you have non-porous containers. So porous containers are ones that are made from natural products, wood, clay, terracotta, or if you have hanging baskets, okay, you're going to have things like wire and moss and core and other fibrous plant materials in that. And wooden containers are also considered porous. So if you use big old whiskey barrels or something like that. One thing I want to mention quickly about clay pots or terracotta, I'm sure some of you maybe have the unfortunate experience of leaving them out over the winter and they just don't make it, okay? So you need to kind of move those back into your garage, your basement, or wherever you keep them. Another problem with clay pots, which I love and are beautiful, is they dry out very quickly. And because they are porous, okay, that water is going to evaporate and things like that. So what you might want to do is, if you have a beautiful clay pot that you just love, or a terracotta pot, have your plant growing in a plastic pot inside. On the outside, in between the pot and the walls of the clay pot, put in some sphagnum moss or crumpled newspaper to help retain that moisture. That's going to help keep it from drying out. Non-porous are things that we love. They're beautiful: ceramic, glass, concrete, all that, plastic, resin, okay? And many of those can be left out over the winter, okay? You'll have to experiment, but I would say if it's ceramic or glass, no. But if you have resin, permastone, things like that, they're gonna pretty much make it over the winter, so you don't necessarily have to pack them away. But if you see the beautiful blue and white pottery on the bottom, I can't leave that out over the winter, okay? It wouldn't survive. Okay, so here's another example of what you might use as a container. These happen to be bags from, I think, Whole Foods, okay? So the one on the left, you got a beautiful tomato plant growing in there. It's got some stakes there to help support it. There has to be holes put in the bottom of the bag. The one next to it is actually a canvas bag, which would make it porous as opposed to non-porous, but look how great the lettuce looks growing in there. Same thing, you're going to have holes for the drainage and so forth. So get creative. Your containers can be just about anything, okay? So you just have to play it by ear. But when you choose your container, remember, you must have adequate drainage. So if you have a container or a pot that you really, really love, you better make sure that it has drain holes in it. Okay, you can buy special kinds of drills if you want to go through the glass or something like that. But if you just have the plant in a pot with no drainage, you're going to kill it. Size does matter. So these are some guidelines. I know there's a lot to read here. Okay, and Judy told me that she's recording it, so you can always look back and you'll say, well, how big or small can my container be? Well, if you're going with herbs, you could go with a 6-inch pot, but you want to make sure that you're choosing shallow rooted herbs like thyme or globe basil, okay? And remember, if it's small, it's going to need more frequent watering. Okay, so keep that in mind. 8 to 10 inches are pretty good for any type of herb, okay? You can use the container to limit the size of an herb to keep it smaller or to allow it to expand more than it normally would. Okay, and then 10 to 18 are going to be able to accommodate multiple herbs, okay? If I'm going to grow exceptionally large, deep-rooted herbs like parsley, I want to have a nice large pot. Parsley has a very large taproot on the bottom. That's part of the reason it's a biennial, okay? And so forth. If I'm growing lemongrass, I'm going to want that in a bigger pot, okay? Because I want it to be able to fill it out and look great. Going over to the right, you can see that vegetables, you might be able to use the small ones, 6 to 10 inches, but pretty much you're only going to be able to use some green onions, herbs. So location, okay? That's one of the beauties of your pots. You know how the sunlight is in your yard. So you might be able to make sure your containers are where they get the morning sun, but if they're not going to thrive well in the heat of the afternoon and that intense afternoon, you're going to kind of move it to the shade. Okay, so that's the beauty of containers, okay, that you can move it and you can kind of be able to control how much moisture is being evaporated by keeping it away from that really intense sunlight in that dog days of summer, as they say. And you can see in the one container there, they actually put a little trellis in there so you can have, you know, your plants growing up that way. And I didn't mention in my raised beds, I do vertical planting as well. I put in frames. And so, for instance, right now in my raised bed, I have a piece starting to grow up the trellis on the back of my raised bed. Later on, I'll intersperse cucumbers in there, not the bush cucumbers, but the vining type, and allow them to grow up in that trellis. So as the peas are dying down, the cucumbers are coming forth, okay? And so they're filling in that space. So I try to take advantage of that. All right, and once more, remember a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight, and you are just gonna kind of make your plant happy depending on its needs. So that's why plant labels are really important, that you read them, okay, so that you know about them, so that when I'm growing plants in containers, I want to make sure that I put the same plants with the same growing needs together. Okay, so I don't want to necessarily grow my rosemary with my basil. Why? Because rosemary can stand it being dry, or lavender can stand it being dry, but my basil generally likes to be moist. So keep that in mind. And once more, water. Soil for containers. Surprise, surprise. That what we call soil for containers is actually a soilless or artificial media is the best kind. I do not want to take garden soil, put it in my containers and think that my vegetables and things are going to grow well. They're not. You want to make sure that you get a soilless artificial media. You're going to read the label very carefully because different types of planting soil are for different things. So I don't want to use cacti soil for my vegetables. Okay, so that's the most obvious thing. Look at the bag. Is it really for vegetables? Okay, you want to make sure that the soil has good drainage, but it's going to hold moisture. You want it to be porous so the water and the air can help reach the roots of the plant. When you purchase a bag of soil or soil mix, okay, check that there aren't any weeds germinating around it. Maybe the bag got a little hole in it and you're going to look and say, I don't want that one. Or maybe I'm going to see some insects flying around. It's like, no, I'm going to choose a different bag, okay? And I want to look at the ingredients, and almost all good potting soil is going to list the ingredients. And so I want to avoid ones that have a large amount of bark or sand in the mix, okay? Because that'll affect the growth of the plants. When you buy the soil, you want it to be moist, the bag, that's good, but I don't want it to be soggy, because somehow if it's soggy, that means water has got in there and some of those nutrients and things have probably been flushed out. And you want to make sure it smells good. It should smell like earth, nothing stinky, okay? So caring for containers, well, stay on the sunny side, okay? The only exception is you're going to find out later on when the summer gets more intense that I don't want, for instance, my basil to burn. So that I want to make sure that I get that in a shady part, that it doesn't get that intense afternoon sun. You're going to water when the soil is dry. You could buy a water meter if you wanted to. They're handy little gadgets to have, but I kind of believe in the old finger test. So I'm going to stick my finger in the soil. If it feels damp, I'm okay. All right. And so that's what you need to do, because that's probably one of the biggest problems or mistakes that people make is not watering when it's needed. Okay, don't let your plants dry out. And with containers, it's a lot easier to do. Keep up with the weeds. Hopefully it won't be a big issue at all. Okay, but you can keep up with them. You can even put a little mulch inside your containers to help keep the moisture in there, keep weeds down. Okay, feed your plants often. Now, generally when we buy potting mix and things, a lot already has food in it, but that is eventually going to disappear, okay? So that we need to give our plants the food that they need. Cut back or deadhead your herbs, especially to grow more, okay? You don't want them to bolt. You don't want them to go to seed. It can make them bitter, okay? And lend your full support. So what I meant by that is, if need be, put in a little trellis, okay? If you're putting a tomato in a container, give it the support that it needs, okay? Don't just let it flop there. And it's much easier to look out for pests when you're growing in a container. And speaking of food, okay, these are peppers I grew last year, okay? So you can see same variety, same growing conditions with one exception. Both were delicious. I happened to get them at the plant sale, okay? And the difference is that the one on the right had a side dressing of warm compost. And so feeding does make a difference. And it's nothing drastic that I did. I thought just for fun, let's see how this works. Because I always add compost to my raised beds anyway. But I thought, you know, what if I give them a little extra boost? And I love warm compost or warm casings and so forth. So I put it around and you can see that it's at least a third larger than the other one. Okay, so yes, food makes a difference. Okay, so what to grow? Decisions. Well, the Oak Park plant sales sponsored by Fopcom is a step in the right direction, okay? They're helping to guide you and giving you plants to tempt you and that are beautifully grown and healthy, okay? So we know plants available from the plant sale will be marked with a little asterisk as I'm going through the next portion of my presentation. And just a reminder, choose plants you'll use. I hate to see anything go to waste. Okay, so if your family hates broccoli, why grow broccoli? Unless you got a neighbor you're trying to help support. Okay, I will say that generally every year I try to grow something new that I've never grown before, more as an experiment, you know, to see and so forth. But really, don't waste your money. Don't waste your time by growing things that you know your family is not going to eat, or it's going to be too much for you to eat on your own, unless you are a person who's able to share your harvest with others, okay? And this last thing is really important too. Let the plants set blossoms or fruits at your home. And this is true whether you're buying herbs, vegetables, or flowers. People like, oh, they want to see it. They want to see the flowers. They want to see the little peppers, the little tomato. Don't do that. Buy ones that haven't started to set their fruit, maybe just beginning to blossom. Why? Because I want them to put all their energy at the beginning, setting out excellent roots. Okay, so don't be tempted like, oh, isn't that little pepper cute? Yeah, don't do it. Okay, let it do it in your backyard or in your container. So contain yourself. Okay, all right. So as you're growing herbs, you might want to start with a theme. Okay, so for instance, you could go with a Mediterranean theme. Okay, and most of these plants like to be a little on the drier side, so you might combine some sage with thyme, rosemary, oregano, marjoram, winter savory. And you don't have to lump them all in one pot if you don't want to. You could kind of have a collection of pots all around. Okay, or if they have the same needs, growth needs, they could look pretty together. You make that decision. It's an aesthetic choice as long as they have the same growing needs. How about Asian? Maybe grow some coriander, some lemon basil, lemongrass, which you see in the photograph there, gets huge, but what a wonderful flavor and fragrance it has. Dill, mint, if you can find like Vietnamese mint, for instance, okay, chili, Thai basil, ginger, pak choi, which is kind of bok choy, pak choi, kind of in that same sort of thing. But you could kind of have a theme going, okay? So you have your Asian garden collection. Or I might want to go Mexican. Okay. And so then I'm going to look at cumin, cilantro, oregano, mint, thyme, marjoram, epazote is a wonderful herb. Okay. If you can find that to grow, it's wonderful flavor and so forth. Ah, ooh la la. Le Français. So if I'm into French cooking, we've got thyme, rosemary, basil, tarragon, marjoram, lavender, summer and winter savory, chives, parsley, chervil. Kind of is making you hungry, isn't it? Okay, a little wine, a little bread, a little cheese. Make it what you want. You know what you enjoy. Ah, that's amore. So all the Italian herbs, we have wonderful Italian flat parsley that you can get at the plant sale, Genoese basil, thyme, oregano, sage, rosemary, bay leaf, fennel, and we're going to talk a little bit more about fennel in just a moment, okay? So that you can see here, this person decided to have things in a separate pot, but once more, you could have your Asian corner, you could have your Mexican corner, you could have your Italian, you could take a trip around the world, okay, with the herbs that you're putting in your containers. It's all up to you. It's all up to your imagination. Okay, things I want you to keep in mind is make sure all your containers have proper drainage. I'll say it again, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again. Plants die from too much water, okay? Containers need, now that we're talking about water, do need more frequent watering. But if you're watering more often and you have the drainage, they're going to be fine, okay? Plants in containers or raised beds can be spaced a little bit more closely than you would just putting them in regular rows in your garden and so forth. I do look at the spacing and so forth and the height and different things to make a decision, but I'm more willing to put a couple more plants, especially if I have a bigger container, okay? And remember, if I have a few more plants, I'm gonna have to water a little more often, okay? The size of your container should be determined by the root length. How long are those roots? How much room do they need? And remember that not all plants get along. Why? Well, one of the reasons is they don't have the same, one likes to be moist, one likes to be dry and so forth. You can see at the bottom, fennel is a good example of a plant that should be grown independently. So if I took a fennel plant and I had a dill plant, and even though their growing needs are pretty much the same, I would lose the taste of the dill. The fennel would overpower it, okay? And so forth. So you want to be careful of that, okay? So yeah, I kind of grow my fennel separately so that it doesn't overpower the flavor. Okay. So some more conservatory offerings, okay? They have a wonderful container tomato bush. It needs full sun. The height's going to be 18 to 24 inches, which is not, how can I say? It's a very nice size for a container tomato, okay? Because if you've grown tomatoes in your regular garden or in your raised bed, you know that they can get really, really tall. So it's nice to have one that's shorter to begin with. The spacing is not too terrible. You could put in a trellis or whatever to help with the spacing. Companion plants that are always nice to grow along with tomatoes would be things like oregano and chives and beans and peppers and thyme and all the yummy stuff. Okay, chocolate sprinkles tomato. I love cherry tomatoes. And this darling gets to be 5 to 7 feet tall. So bear that in mind when you are putting it in a container. It's got to be a big container and it's got to be by itself, okay? And you need to provide support for it, okay? But the beauty of cherry tomatoes, like the chocolate sprinkles, is they are ready to harvest a lot sooner. And I know a lot of people need their tomato fix as soon as they can get it. And boy, there's nothing as delicious as taking a tomato from your container or your garden and biting into it, and somehow the sun tastes like it's in the tomatoes so that you feel like you're biting into a bit of sunshine, okay? And so chocolate sprinkles is perfect. 50 to 55 days, you're going to be able to fix them. They're generally, the fruit's generally 1 to 1.5 inches. Okay, now this is an old standard, isn't it? California Wonder, we love it. It's hardy. It's been around. Why? Because it's a great grower. Okay. Full sun, height 18 to 24 inches, spread not too wide at all, 12 inches. Ooh, that tells me I could put a couple different kinds of peppers in one of my containers, okay? And companion plants along with California Wonder would be our tomatoes and basil. Here's another type. And I don't know about you, but I really, really like to have a variety of color on my plate. And, you know, the vitamin C, in fact, if I go back, California Wonder can turn red, but you got to be patient and willing to wait a little bit longer for that red. So if you don't want to wait that long and you want a little color, you might go with the orange blaze pepper, okay? Once more, the height's only 2 feet tall. It was an all-American selection, so that meant wonderful flavor, disease resistant, perfect for containers. So now you're kind of getting the idea. You got one of those California Wonders going, you got one of these orange blaze going. And so companion plants, chives, onions, basil, carrot. Ah, what a delight. I was so tickled to see that this was an offering from the Conservatory, Shishito pepper, Mellow star. And this is the cutest little pepper, okay? You want it to be really hot, but it's not hot like jalapeno is, okay? So it doesn't have a lot of heat, but it has marvelous flavor, okay? It's only going to grow to about 24 inches. Look at the spacing again, 12 to 18 inches. Oh, I could put this cutie in and have a nice big container. California Wonder, Golden Blaze, and the Shishito pepper. And this pepper is delightful. It's going to change from green to red. You're going to have a combination. Great for snacking if I just wanted to pick it off the plant, but chefs love it. You can use it for stir-fried, grill, whatever moves you. Okay, so salad bush cucumber. How perfect. Look at that container. That's not a huge container. And you can grow your cucumbers in that container. So this is perfect for container gardening on your patio. Okay, you don't have a lot of room. Take advantage of the salad bush, okay? It has great flavor, and I think you'll be pleased if you chose to purchase it. Now here's okra is wonderful. I love the flavor. I love all the vitamins it offers. This baby needs to be grown on its own. It's going to get to be at least 4 feet tall, but look at the beautiful blossoms. Isn't it outstanding to see that in your garden and so forth? And I want you to remember when you grow okra to make sure that you don't let them get too large, okay? You want to harvest them when they're smaller because they're going to turn bitter, kind of chewy, okay? So harvest young and harvest small. Speaking of big plants that take up a lot of space, but have a powerful amount of flavor. Tomatillo, Toma Verde. Wonderful. I love Tomatillo. Okay. Now, this is going to require a lot of space. I won't lie to you. You know, you'd have to have 2 really big containers. And the reason I say 2 is because you're going to have a better harvest if you grow 2 tomatillo plants. I could have 1, but I probably wouldn't gather as much fruit. And unless I went out with my Q-tip and started to take the pollen to share it and so forth, this is going to get to be at least 4 feet, not only in height, but in width. So it really needs to be caged, okay? You have to give it all the support it needs, but the flavor is unbelievable. So if you like salsa verde, oh God. And it's pest free. And if you haven't had a tomatillo, I want you to try it. Go and buy some at the store. What a wonderful kind of lemony, limey, totally different than what you think. Even even more so than a green tomatoes. I like fried green tomatoes, but I think tomatillo just kind of has a kind of a citrusy flavor to it. Okay, so that's another one to look for if you got the room and the space. Okay. Ah, kale. Let's talk about kale. Now I see that kale is very popular because when I looked at the website for the plant sale, I was seeing different plants that had already been sold out. And I saw we got a lot of people who eat kale. Okay. Now, the kale that the conservatory selected are ones that are going to tolerate the summer heat a little bit more than other ones. But I have to be honest and say you're going to have the best success with kale from your spring, early summer harvest, and then do another harvest in the fall. So start some end of August, beginning of September, so you have it there in the winter time. But if you look at the kale and look how pretty they would look together in a container. Lacinato has been around for ages, okay? I mean, you know, it goes back to Italy. It holds up when you're cooking it, when you're doing Italian meals and so forth. It's called Dinosaur Kale. So if you look at the leaves, you can probably see why. But they also call it palm tree kale because if you are harvesting your kale properly, you're taking the leaves from the bottom. And so what happens is you're taking those leaves on the very bottom. Well, you're going to have kind of a stalk. So at the top, you're going to have the kale still growing. It starts to look like a palm tree, okay? Because you've harvested that way. Scarlet kale, you're still going to go around the bottom, but it's not going to be as exaggerated, the stalk behind. And some more greens that are delightful that the conservatory is offering. Switch chard, bright lights. It makes me smile when I see it in my garden. All the different colors and things like this. This too is a plant that is going to be happier, not in the heat of summer. When it gets dog days in August, it's not going to be at its best, but I sure would plant some more. Okay, late summer so that I have it. Same thing with Arugula Astro. What a beautiful little green to add to your salads. Nice flavor. Okay, once more, happiest when it's a little bit cooler, not terribly hot. Do the same thing in the fall. Okay, in fact, I had mentioned to someone and they said, oh, don't start trouble, Suzette. But I said, gee, it'd be kind of cool if they had a fall plant sale, like a mini one, you know, with kale and chard, you know. So if you're for that, you need to get your word in. Okay, all right. Oh, basil. Do we have basil? So if you're looking at the pictures, you can see purple ruffles there. Okay, we've got the sweet Genovese up on the top on the right. The next one is Ruckert's Obsession. Okay, and then down at the very bottom is Aristotle. I can't tell you how sweet that is and how pretty that looks at the bottom of a pot with other things. It's almost aesthetically beautiful. So even if you weren't going to eat it for the basil flavor, just adding it to your pot is a wonderful thing. Okay, so please take advantage of all the basil that we have. Genovese, wonderful, mozzarella, tomato, you know, can't you taste it now? Okay, so take advantage. And pesto, oh my goodness, pesto, how wonderful. Okay, I'm making myself hungry, sorry. So I want you to know that containers of edibles do not need to be boring, okay? So add flowers along with your herbs and veggies. So take advantage of it, okay? So here you have a container, you got some basil, looks like purple ruffles is in there, Genovese in there. I'm seeing either some pansies in the front. I could see some nasturtiums planted along because with all containers, you want to remember the thriller, the filler, and the spiller, okay? So you want to have the height, you want it filled in, you want things spilling over the edge. Some thyme would look wonderful coming down. Okay, I could see that Aristotle, basil. Yeah, You got a lot of choices. All right. How are we doing for time? Okay.
Yeah, you want to probably wrap up.
Okay. Well, let
Yeah,
me
we
go
got a
real
lot of
fast over this
questions.
bonus. Okay. And then we'll go on.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And the bonus, I get this question a lot from people. Can you reuse soil in your growing beds and containers? And then I love butterflies. So I'll briefly mention how to attract butterflies. All right. So reusing soil. Here's a short and sweet way to look at it. One of your biggest expenses with containers and raised beds, after buying the plants themselves, is the soil that you have to add. Why completely take out all the soil when you can reuse it if you follow these directions, okay? You can replace 1/3 to 1/2 of old soil in containers. The only exception I would say are those little tiny sweet containers that are maybe 6 inches. I just start with fresh soil with that. But any bigger container, get rid of half the soil, and then you're going to mix up that soil that's left to loosen it up, take out any debris that might be in there, twigs, old roots, and so forth. Add some new potting soil or compost to it. I would add a few amendments because containers don't have the advantage of getting nutrients from the ground. And so I might want to add some organic fertilizer, maybe a little blood meal. Okay, that would add nitrogen. Bone meal would be good for phosphorus. Azomote is pretty good for adding some minerals and bacteria and things like that. And then my favorite is my compost, okay? It's to add the nutrition. So yes, it is possible to reuse your soil, okay? And butterflies. The photo on the left is a picture I took last summer, and that's a dill plant next to a parsley plant that was growing on my deck. And that caterpillar happens to be a black swallowtail caterpillar and so forth. I have other pictures where you can kind of see the little tiny eggs and things like that. And so the joke is I buy several containers of dill if I don't start it myself. And why? One's for me, the other 2 are for the butterflies, okay? And so forth. The butterflies love fennel, swallowtails love fennel, carrot tops, dill, parsley. It's wonderful and it's magical. Okay. And if you have kids, or even if you have fascination in yourself, you can kind of raise them. You can move them into a butterfly haven and then release them later on and so forth. And so that's just a wonderful hobby. I also want to make sure that I'm growing herbs and plants that provide the nectar, and some of the things at the conservatory, like lavender, chives, yarrow, catnip, all make wonderful nectar to help the adult butterflies. But for hosts, to get them to lay eggs, parsley, dill, fennel are all going to be great choices for swallowtails and other types of butterflies. If you want monarchs, milkweed's a whole nother story, okay? And I got plenty of milkweed. Okay, so I hope you enjoy your garden. I hope you enjoy your herbs, okay? And attract a few butterflies. And these are some resources, and Judy was kind enough to say that she would share them to you because I can't make them go live. You can see that I take advantage of the gardening resources from the University of Illinois. Easy Urban Gardens is a wonderful site to go to. And they had a really, really neat article about growing different types of vegetables and hanging pots. Because sometimes people say, well, I don't really have the room and I only live in an apartment. I only got this little balcony. Well, if you have the sunlight and stuff, you might be able to grow veggies in a hanging pot. And so I would check out Easy Urban Gardens because let's face it, we live in an urban area and they have other great articles as well. Another place I like to go and visit is the Spruce. And I go to the Spruce for a lot of different reasons, but do take a peek at their gardening section. Remember, I told you you wanted to be careful about the container you choose, and you want to know the depth of the roots. of the plant, this is a great site to go to. How to find the root depth of vegetables. And this is from gardenbetty.com. And the lady who runs gardenbetty.com is Linda Lee, L-Y, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And she has a printable chart out there. You can print it out and you can see how much space the roots need and so forth. And she has a lot of neat articles. I mean, I get an email from her at least once a week with a different tip about something. Okay, and just want to give some more credit out here. I used an article from the Old Farmer's Almanac by Robin Switzer, Container Gardening with Vegetables, and how to more vegetables with less work. If you're really, really into organics, then you might want to visit www.kellogggarden.com. They have all sorts of booklets and guides. Yes, I know that they are trying to sell products, but if you kind of ignore just the products and look at the information they're providing you, wonderful source for organic gardening. And then I took advantage of an article from the extension about refreshing raised soil generates exceptional results. Okay, so now we're ready.
Yeah, we are. First of all, let me just thank you, Suzette, for presenting all this amazing information to us. I am just, astonished and inspired. And so, so many good things you shared today. And I know we have lots of questions, so I'm going to just invite Kayla to start peppering you with questions.
Yeah, so that was a great talk. Thank you so much. It was really, really, really educational, and the comments were just so incredibly positive. I really encourage you to glance through them later.
Okay, thank you, Kayla.
But so one of the questions we had was you brought up mulching.
Yeah.
So after you plant, you were saying mulch. And so one of the questions was, do you have a recommendation for a type of mulch? And can you use grass clippings from your yard?
Okay, can you hear me still?
Yep.
Okay, so I use grass clippings sometimes, but I also know that I do not use any chemicals whatsoever on my lawn. And I have the dandelions to prove it, and the pollinators thank me for it. But so I want to be careful if I'm going to put grass in there, okay? Just to make sure that I know it's chemical free, okay? And the other thing is that you might be actually bringing a few weed seeds in with the grass. So if you don't mind going through, pulling out the weeds, grass clippings is fine. You can use shredded bark is fine. It'll break down. It'll provide nitrogen into the soil, would be wonderful. There is a product out there called Easy Straw. And so I'm not in the business of selling products, okay? But my understanding is Easy Straw doesn't have any seeds per se in it. And so, but you know what? The best way to mulch is if you've got compost. So ideally, you're composting at home on your own, whether it's vermiculture that you're doing with worms, or you've got bins, or just buy a reputable bag of compost. And what's happening there is you're keeping the plants cool, you're keeping the weeds down, but you're also feeding them.
Gotcha. And actually building on that discussion around compost and about worm casings. So how do you actually use the worm casings? Are you sprinkling them on top, or are you like working them into the soil? How are you kind of working that?
Okay, generally, like when I showed you the picture with the peppers, where one was much larger, okay, I actually just kind of sprinkled it all around like the base of the plant, like the diameter of it. And I said, okay, I know the roots are going to go here, and so forth. Why? Because I didn't want to disturb the roots per se. So I just side dress is what I call it. So like when I put it on top like that, and that works. How does it get into the soil? Well, just watering, rain, whatever, it's going to get there. The beauty of compost is that it's providing food in a slow method that's not going to burn my plants. Okay, and so forth. And I use the warm compost around everything. So I had a neighbor down the street and she says, "Oh, so my clematis isn't blooming. I don't know what to do." I said, "I got something for you." And so I brought her kind of a little combo tub of some of my warm composting and regular compost from my bin in the backyard. I told her I wanted her to scrape the top of the soil around her clematis, okay, because I knew those roots and they had been there a long time. So I knew it wouldn't disturb it. And she was like 2 weeks later, she goes, "My God, what did you give me?" She goes, "It's like a magic elixir, you know." And then somebody else said, "What did you give me?" So I cannot begin to tell you the wonders of composting. And so use compost, whether you have to buy it, whether you do it yourself. And to me, warm compost is kind of warm casings is primo. It's the best, kind of like platinums and edge above gold. Okay.
Awesome, thank you. So kind of building on that and speaking about feeding, is there, like, when is the best time to feed your vegetables? Is there a schedule that you need to be thinking about? Is different times of the year you need to be feeding them different nutrients? How is the best to move through that?
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about it. I want to be careful that, so if I'm setting up my raised bed or my container for the first time, I'm gonna perhaps buy a mix that already has some nutrients or fertilizer in it. But if it doesn't, I am going to be adding my compost to that mix and so forth. And then I'm going to plant the plants. I had mentioned things like blood meal, which is a wonderful source of nitrogen. But if I put that, say I bought a pepper at the conservatory, and I put it in my container and then I sprinkled blood meal around it, I would burn my plant. And so you're going to be better off if you take kind of like handfuls of the different amendments, really mix it in very carefully into your soil if it doesn't already have nutrients. And then I would do my planting. And then as I go through, it really is up to you on your choice of fertilizer. Some people like to use liquid, some people like to use granular. I like to go with organic. Okay, so I take advantage of compost, but you might look into organic fertilizers. And generally, I would say that a container is going to be all zapped out of its nutrients after about 6 weeks. So that I would say that I am going to feed it lightly, not exuberantly, but lightly. So about 3 weeks in, and continue. And then I would say over the course of the summer, I probably maybe feed my plants about 4 times. Okay.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. And so actually kind of building on that again, when you're talking about replacing about 1/3 of the soil each year in the container, is that the raised beds as well, or is that just containers?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My raised bed too. What'll happen is you're going to notice after you have raised beds for a while that the soil kind of naturally begins to settle. And you're going to go, wow, my raised bed doesn't look like it has much soil. So, so then I know that I need to replace it and put some in. So what I want to do is with my raised beds is I'm going to fluff it. I'm going to take my pitchfork or whatever, loosen it up a little bit. If you followed my suggestions, and in the fall, when you were putting it to bed, put some shredded leaves in there, put some compost in there, you're not going to need to add so much additional soil. But I also like to give my raised beds a little extra boost. So I might buy a bag for, my, let's say a 4-by-8-foot bed that I have. Okay, that one. I might buy 2 bags of potting mix that's made for raised beds and do that. okay, to add to it, okay, because I want to make sure that there's plenty of soil in there for the roots to grow and things like that. So, yes, so I don't totally ever empty out my raised bed. I just add to it.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe we can get a little bit plant specific, and thank you for highlighting all the plants that we have at the plant sale. There was one question, when those plants sell out at the plant sale, are they going to be replenished?
Repeat it one more time.
When the plants sell out at this year's plant sale, will they be replenished?
I
No.
don't think so.
But yeah, it's while supplies last, but like Genovese basil is already sold out, but we have 3 other types of basil in that darling little small
Oh,
leaf basil.
Aristotle?
Yeah,
Oh.
it's still available and I just bought some yesterday. So the edibles are still in pretty good supply, and but we will not be able, we're out of space is basically what's happening. There's only so much space in the greenhouses, and we can do thousands of tiny little seedlings, but then those little seeds and seedlings get bigger and bigger. And so we have to allow the space for the plants to be healthy and well grown for you. So we will not be able to add more at this time, but there will be future sales coming up as well that the conservatory will be doing with pollinator plants, and they usually do a bulb sale and winter greens and things like that.
Awesome. So again, getting back to a bit more specific. So let's talk about tomatoes briefly.
Okay.
So how, and this is a question that came up a lot, but how do you protect your tomatoes from squirrels and bunnies and all of the things that want to eat your delicious tomatoes? How do you protect them?
Yeah. Okay. Well, on my raised beds, I have netting around it. Okay. And so it's not really chicken wire, it's more plastic, but they call it chicken wire. And so I kind of have that all around my raised beds, and I have plastic stakes that'll go through. And so if I really need to get into my bed, to weed, if I haven't mulched properly or whatever, I can easily take out the netting temporarily to get to it. So that's one way to do it. There are different products that you can put out there. They kind of smell like rotten eggs. Repel All, I think, is the name of one of them, for instance, and it does smell like rotten eggs when you put it down. And so that'll temporarily keep them away because of the smell. It does have to be replenished. I'm a real big proponent of putting a lot of very inexpensive chili powder or paprika or cayenne pepper around some of my plants, and or maybe do a spray with a cayenne pepper on my tomatoes and so forth. Now, don't forget, if it rains, okay, or if you're watering overhead, it might get washed away. So that could be a temporary solution. I have to say, nothing bugs me more than to have a squirrel steal a tomato, take a bite, and leave it there. It's kind of like, I want you to have the tomato. Could you just eat the whole thing, not just take a bite and throw it? So you can tell what I'm saying to you is I don't have 100% success. Okay, but these are some suggestions that help cut it down.
Okay, perfect. What about pruning tomatoes?
Okay, that's an art in itself. Okay. So your goal for in pruning tomatoes is that you want to have your tomatoes grow larger. I mean, is usually one of the purposes. So you need to kind of focus in on one main shoot, and those side shoots you're going to trim off. So your tomato plant might not look as lush. Okay. And so it's kind of an art form. And so I guess if you were just starting for the first time, I might want to go every other, layer. Does that make sense to you a little bit? And so forth. And so that's what you have to do. I do suggest you go online and see what some other people have suggested. I always page my tomatoes, and so I try to keep them from getting over exuberant. And so then I'll prune off some of the branches. But generally you want to be really careful that you have at least one main stalk there.
Okay, perfect. And maybe just for time, maybe, I mean, there's a few other questions, but maybe I'll just ask this last one. And maybe I'm biased because this happens to me too, but how do you make lettuce not be bitter?
Oh, okay. Well, part of it is with lettuce, lettuce is one of those crops that you want to really have in the cooler weather. I want to keep it out of the sun. So, I'm going to go with that minimum of sunlight, 6 hours. Okay. I don't want it to have the intense afternoon sun. Never let it bolt because it's automatically going to become bitter. So you want to harvest it as often as possible. Don't forget to leave the crown intact and go around the bottom on the outside. And I would say to you that in the heat of the summer, July, beginning of August, unless you're able to work out a way where you can kind of grow it more in shade. And so sometimes what I do is I have a kind of almost an A-frame trellis, if you want to think about it that way. And so there's an opening underneath, and I have cucumbers growing. So the leaves are kind of like an arbor, and I'll have the lettuce under there. And that shading allows the lettuce to grow a bit longer without getting really bitter and not starting to bolt right away.
Brilliant,
Okay.
brilliant.
Yeah.
So first, let me just again say thank you, Suzette. I mean, I would like to stay on a little bit longer if people are interested in hanging out with us. Suzette, if you're open to it, we can
Sure.
continue to chat and answer a few more questions. But let me just say that we are so grateful for you putting this presentation together. I mean, there's so much. My head is spinning, but it was all
Yeah,
such
it
good
was
information.
probably almost too much, to be honest, but
Well, I think that, gardening can be overwhelming. And what we're trying to do is bring information and content to people to give them confidence to experiment, right? We want to go out there and not think that everything's going to be lush and perfect every single time. But if we don't try planting something, I bought a bunch of okra. I've never grown okra before, but I'm like, okay, I got to see how this behaves. I'm very
make
interested
sure you
in.
have plenty of space.
Okay, well, now I know. I mean, really, that was a tip. I had no idea. I bought 4 plants. I had no idea.
You're going to
Uh,
love the blossoms. They're beautiful.
I'm sure. So thank you
You're
for
welcome.
putting the presentation together for us.